What's going on? What's going on? So I'm here to give my prediction for a fight that I forgot was taking place this weekend, man. I had so much going on. Um, I'm here to give a prediction for the fight between Brian Norman Jr. and Giovanni Santillan, which takes place this weekend, May 18th, in San Diego at 147 pounds. All right, so let's get into the tail of the tape between these two fighters, man. So we got Brian Norman Jr., man. He's the guy that, um, if you guys remember, he's the one of the dudes that said that he gave Tank a good run in their sparring session. And then Tank came out with a photo that had Brian Norman nose looking all crazy. Brian Norman, he claims that was a doctored picture. It was a lot of back and forth between him and Tank. But that's that's when I started really noticing Brian Norman Jr. is from that situation with Tank and his sparring and stuff like that. But yeah, Brian Norman Jr. 25 wins, 25 wins, no losses, no draws. 19 wins by knockout. He has 76% knockout ratio. So yeah, Brian Norman Jr. working with some good power. Pretty decent, pretty good heavy puncher. 23 years old, 5'8" in height, 72-inch arm reach. All right. So he goes by the name of Assassin 2 pretty much because his dad, I believe, was a boxer too. So his dad was the original assassin and he is the second assassin. So we got Giovani Santillan. All right. He has 32 wins, no losses, no draws, 17 wins by knockout. So he has a 53% knockout ratio. But don't let that fool you. He does have punching power. It's just that, he has so many fights. If you start stepping it up in competition or, you start piling on fights, lots of times, man, not all the time, but a lot of times the KOs start disappearing and you start getting a lot of UDs. So that's what happens. Doesn't mean he can't fight. Doesn't mean he doesn't have power. He does. He put a good beating on Alexis Rocha. Nobody's did that, has ever done that. Right? So he's 32 years old, 5'8", with a 68.5-inch arm reach. So Brian Norman Jr. and Giovanni Santillan are the same height. Brian Norman has the reach advantage and the youth on his side. So as far as Brian Norman Jr. goes, he never really impressed me. He's okay from what I can see. I mean, the way they're moving him is almost like similar to the way they've been moving Jerron Boutennis. This guy has 25 fights. That's a lot of fights, man. He has really fought nobody yet at all. So, Boots has a slightly better resume than Brian Norman, but it looks like, I guess promotion ain't really there for him the way it should be. But he hasn't really stepped it up yet. So this fight with Santillan is a good step up fight for Brian Norman Jr. Some things I noticed about him when he fights, man. He's strong. He's real strong. Big dude. Pretty decent pop shot jab. He doesn't really move his head much. And it doesn't really look like he doesn't really tuck his chin a lot either. If you watch the fight with Boca Chica, that's the fight that he got dropped in before the fight got stopped. That's what, he forgot to keep the phone home. You know what I mean? And he swung a little wild, got reckless, came up short, and he got clipped for it and got dropped. Like a flash knockdown. But, yeah, he doesn't really duck. He doesn't move his head. And he doesn't, in exchanges, he can get hit. He had caught a lot in exchanges, too. His defense ain't really there with exchanges. He kind of stiff in a way. He kind of his body is really stiff at top. I watch him, I'm like, man, why he don't loosen up a little bit? He seems a little stiff. He definitely don't tuck his chin. And he definitely don't move his head. That's something I think they should work on, man. But nonetheless, decent fighter, man. I mean, I haven't seen, him fight the top comp, so I can't really see how really good he really is until he steps up and fights like a Boots or somebody in the top 10 or something like that. Then I could look at him like, okay, this fight here with Giovani Santillan is going to be a nice test for him, though. So let's talk about his last 3 performances, man. So the last performance, like I just spoke of, was against Janelson Boca Chica, and it didn't go far. It only went 3 rounds because of clashes of heads. They were cut. Both of them got cut. But Brian Norman ended up getting dropped in that fight. In the first round, to be exact, he got dropped. Right at the end of the first round, flash knockdown with a nice crisp short right by Boca Chica. Got back up, didn't look all out of place or nothing like that. Got back up and proceeded to fight, but they ended up both getting gashes, and this fight became a no contest. And they had to stop it. So can't really gauge his performance on that. But in that, leading up to the end of the fight, I mean, like I said, he was doing all right. He wasn't, didn't look spectacular or anything like that. Got some good jabs in, some good punches. He looked like he kind of rocked him a little bit in the first. He rocked Boca Chica early on in that round, but, really nothing to call mama about, The fight didn't last long enough for me to really gauge anything. In a fight against Quentin Randall, man, that went the distance. Brian Norman Jr. was having trouble in that fight. Seemed like he was having trouble finding his range. Another thing about Brian Norman Jr., it looks like he smothers a lot of his punches, man. Something about him, I don't know, it's just he smothers his punches a lot, man. He always running into his opponent, it seems like. But he was having his slight moments, but Quentin Randall was getting off on him pretty good. He was having issues with Quentin Norman's movement and his jab for the most part. Yeah, he definitely was getting hit with good uppercuts. He got hit with a real good uppercut, I think like the 5th round by Quentin Randall. I think if Quentin had more pop on his punches, he probably could have did some real damage to Brian Norman with that uppercut, But overall, man, I think that's his defense, man. They got to work on Brian Norman's defense. Against Jesus Campos, Brian Norman Jr. looked much sharper in that fight, much more on his feet, slightly better head movement. He was more technically sound in that fight, so to speak, if we talking about as far as technically sound with Brian Norman Jr. goes. He got an 8-round unanimous decision on that fight. But like I said, it's just something about his defense that just worries me a lot. Like, he gonna get clipped. I feel like he gonna get clipped wrong by somebody, and then that's gonna probably be it. As far as Giovani Santillan, his last 3 fights, like I said, Alexis Roca, and he had a fight. Yeah, it was Alexis Roca, Eric Bone, and Julio Luna Avila. All right, against Alexis Roca, man. I mean, that he put on a fucking masterclass. Broke Alexis Roca down. That was a rock'em sock'em fight, bomb burner. Knocked Alexis Roca down twice in the 5th, and then he stopped him in the 6th round. So he put on a masterclass in that fight. Excellent performance by Giovani Santillan in that fight. So the next fight he had before the Alexis Roca fight was a guy named Eric Bonet. I called him Bone, so excuse me, brother, for decimating your last name. But yeah, Eric Bonet. He's from Ecuador, so they pronounce it Bonet. In this fight against Eric Bonet, Giovani Santillan was much more calm. He boxed a bit more in this fight. He wasn't as aggressive as he was against Alexis Roca. But he did good in this fight. Boxed him to the win, to the 8th round decision. But you can just see the difference in the fighting style. He was much more paced, calm. He wasn't much of a brawler as he was against Alexis Roca. Nonetheless, did excellent in that fight as well. Then the fight between Giovani Santillan and Ho- oh, I'm sorry. See, I was looking at the wrong person. There was another fighter that I was looking at the wrong because I have two screens open. So I was looking at Brian Norman, his opponent, by accident. But the third opponent that he faced after Eric Bonet was a guy by the name of Julio Luna Avila. In this fight against Julio Luna Avila, Avila was a sparring partner of Santillan in the past, so they had some experience in the ring. But Luna was doing good with the jab. The jab was causing some issues for Santillan in that fight. Santillan early on, found some good body work. You could see the speed difference between the two fighters. Santillan definitely had the speed over him, but that lankiness of Luna was causing some issues for Santillan in the fight. But ultimately, Santillan ended up pulling it off. Did some good boxing. Looked a little impatient in there at times, but he got the job done. And Santillan got cut in that fight, and they both got cut. I think it was like the seventh and third round. It says here they got cut in the seventh and third round. Yeah, so he pulled that fight off, and it's funny because they're fighting in the same exact spot this Saturday at the Pachanga Arena. That's where he will be fighting Brian Norman Jr. So what do I think, man? How's this fight gonna look, man? I'll be honest. I see Santillan probably pretty much going in there doing the same thing he tried to do. He did to Alexis Roca, going in there, putting the pressure on Brian Norman Jr. Brian Norman doesn't have as much experience, as a little less fights than Santillan does. But ultimately, man, I'll be real with y'all. I like Brian Norman Jr., man. But I don't think he's winning this fight, bro. Judging by his past 3 fights and beyond, I've been watching a lot of his fights. He just looked above average to me in a lot of his fights, man. Santillan been looking good. He's older, but he just wiser. Look, he gets better. It looks like in all his fights. I think his speed gonna be a factor in this fight. The volume punching is gonna be a factor. Brian Norman, like I said, he doesn't move his head. He get caught a lot in exchanges. I see him pretty much. I could see this going either way, man. I could see this being Brian Norman getting knocked out, or Brian Norman getting outboxed. Now, we don't know how good Brian Norman's chin really is. We haven't really seen him fight anybody with some real significant punching power. Now, Santillan has pretty decent power. We're going to see how Brian Norman could take them shots. But he's not like a huge puncher, but we're going to see. Brian Norman is a bigger puncher. He can hurt. There's a chance that you can see Brian Norman hurt Santillan in this fight as well. But I think Santillan is solid. I think he got a good chin. He was taking some good shots from Alexis Rocha, who also has punching power. So ultimately, though, I'm going to go on a limb and say in this fight, Brian Norman gets stopped. Yeah. I think this is the first fight you're going to see Brian Norman get stopped. And this is a step-up fight. He needed this fight, but I think Giovani Santillan might be a little bit too much for Brian Norman Jr., so I'd have to give this fight, I say stoppage, man, maybe 5th round before he stopped Roca. I think Roca is better skilled than Brian Norman Jr., so I'm going to go with Giovani Santillan, 5th round stoppage of Brian Norman Jr. I know a lot of y'all like, what you talking about, Rebel? No, that's too soon. It's not going to happen. I could be wrong, but like I said, I went back and watched some of Brian Norman's fights, went back and watched a few of his, and I just put them in the ring in my head, and I could just see, I can't see what Brian Norman could do besides laying a really good shot on Santillan that could probably stop him or hurt him. But I don't see it, man. I don't see it. I think Santillan's defense is too solid. I think he's gonna be catching him with them left overhands, cracking him on the side of his head. I think he gonna hurt him, man. He gonna hurt him and stop him in the 5th round. To be generous, I'll give it to the 7th round, but I'll say I'm going with the 5th round stoppage for Giovani Santillan, man. Just my take. Anyway, let me know what you think. This is Rebel Life Boxing. I'll catch y'all in the next one. And I'm off this.